Quite nice to see in this era of murder clowns, muscly golden boys, and advanced battle suits that occasionally an underdog can triumph. Let's talk about a tournament winning Blood Angels list. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Blood Angels, perhaps one of the Space Marine chapters that have been struggling one of the most throughout 9th edition. Their chapter tactic and doctrine are certainly really cool and allow them to hit really hard, but they lost a whole ton of mobility options with their 9th edition codex, and a lot of their unique characters aren't particularly exciting. It's always quite cool when people manage to make something off-meta work in the current competitive environments though. So today I thought we'd take a look at two strong Blood Angels army lists, one of which won a small 5-man tournament, and one placed quite highly at a bigger one. There's a few differences, but they definitely highlight some of the very strongest things that the Sons of Sanguinius can bring to bear in 9th edition. First up we have this list by Sweet Law, who used it to take first at the Heroes Retreat Mini GT, and was able to beat a fairly nasty Custodians list to do so. Custodians are fairly savage against Blood Angels with the amount of damage to weapons they have, usually being very good at clearing most of their squads. The list is built around a single Blood Angels battalion, 4 characters, 3 troop squads, and a whole load of jump packs. Not really too dissimilar from the second list, but they've also chosen to take a bit of fire support along, a unit of Devastators with grav cannons, and a supporting whirlwinds. Leading the force we have Commander Dante himself, out of the special characters perhaps one of the most common picks in competitive Blood Angels lists. His melee stats are kind of okay, I'd argue that they're not particularly impressive compared with quite a lot of other chapter masters that have had 9th edition codexes. But between some relatively quality melee and also his full rerolls, he does seem to get the nod in quite a lot of Blood Angels lists as a really decent force multiplier who can also lend a hand in combat, and getting a free stratagem once per game doesn't really hurt either. There's then interestingly not just one but 2 sanguinary priests in the list. They do apothecary things and also allow you to heal and resurrect your own models, and being Blood Angels they can also access the assault doctrine early, really nice when you're also getting extra attacks on top of extra AP. The jump pack one's got a whole swath of useful supporting things, Soul Warden for some psychic denials, Rites of War for some obsec on the move, and the Icon of the Angel to re-roll some charges. He'd be pretty happy bounding along with the Sanguinary Guard or Vanguard vets. The other one then runs on foot and takes the Armor Indomitus. Interesting that he's not shelled out for a jump pack, which means that he might struggle a tiny bit to keep up with the rest of the jump packs, maybe a bit more of a countercharge support option, and he could always use the Armor Indomitus' special save to try and tank a whole load of hits for a squad using Angel's Sacrifice. Could allow you to fairly safely charge a really big hitter and know that they're probably not going to be able to swipe down your Sanguinary Guard before you get to kill them. Finally for characters, there's just some raw melee might in a company champion, upgraded to the chapter champion and taking the Imperium Sword and Blade of Triumph. He's not really doing anything too complicated, he's simply a cheap level 70 point character with a bit of investment, who will hit really quite spectacularly hard for his cost, usually 6 attacks at strength 8 and damage 3 with a +1 to wound as well. With the +1 to wound I do feel that Blood Angels are one of the better choices for using company champions, though a fair few people do seem to prefer buffed up captains or lieutenants instead. He's certainly likely to cut a swathe through heavy infantry though, and will be particularly good against characters where you can re-roll the wound rolls. Then we get into the squads, and in the troop section there's 2 units of 5 incursors and 1 unit of assault intercessors. Nice for just holding objectives while being pretty tough, and they all have a bit of extra AP if they do need to mix it up in melee. Even these guys can be pretty threatening with the +1 to wound and the assault doctrine on the go. And then we're into the jump pack forces, a unit of 4 sanguinary guards with the axes, a unit of 5 that take power fists, interestingly paying the extra 5 points for strength 8. I must admit I'm not usually the biggest fan of power fists, but they're a bit less of a terrible option if they are going to be run in concert with the warlord trait, which will allow you to re-roll all hits. There's then a massively hard-hitting unit of Death Company with Thunderhammers and jump packs. They look legitimately terrifying and could easily be forlorn furying their way to a first turn charge if they want to. That's potentially 20 Thunderhammer attacks with AP -3 and +1 to wound if they do happen to activate the Assault Doctrine by a Sanguinary Priest or a couple of CP. Might be enough to end one important threat before the opponent even gets a first turn. Then we've got an enormous unit of Vanguard veterans with a fairly standard build of jump packs, lightning claws and storm shields. Again with +1 to wound there's very little that they won't be able to handle fairly well. The sergeant having a little bit of extra muscle taking a mastercrafted relic blade for a big damage 3. And then there's the interesting fire support elements. A whirlwind with a Castellan launcher is quite a nice way to hand out fights last, quite important if you're going to be charging 2 different targets somewhere on the board, particularly for Blood Angels, as your opponent might just interrupt and kill your fragile but very hitty marines before they get to strike. But perhaps most interestingly are the Devastators with the Grav Cannons and Armorium Cherub. It's maybe not the most common pick to be fielding Grav Devastators on foot without a drop pod or something. I guess if they're starting on the board, they could be really quite a good recipient of Dante's rerolls on turn 1, allowing them to move and then get 4 rerolls to hit. Or I suppose could use something like Strategic Reserve if they wanted to, if it made more sense to do that. It looks really quite fun to play though, really leaning into the savage jump pack destruction of Blood Angels, and I do quite like that company champion. It'd be really quite good fun to use, and I guess damage 3 attacks really aren't bad in a meta where custodies are quite prevalent. I think Blood Angels at the moment are always going to be an army where you're going to need to play with them pretty carefully though. Even with a strong list with a few crafty tricks, if you expose a lot of these to enemy fire at once, they're going to get shot off the board quite quickly. They definitely need to be making good use of terrain, and they're certainly an army that takes a fair bit more skill to play than some of the top dogs of the meta. Really cool to see them dominating a tournament though, and certainly hats off to the guy who managed to pull that out of the bag. Finally, for our second list, we have a heavy jump pack assault list, this one run by Adrian de Roche, who used it to take 5th at the Fool's Errand tournament, another very impressive achievement as it's really quite a big one and it had over 90 players. It's kind of fun to see some of the similarities and differences between this and the first list. As I mentioned before, it is kind of similar in that we've got 4 characters supporting a whole load of jump packs, though it seems that rather than having support elements with a little bit of firepower, we've just really doubled down on the jump pack death here. On the character roster, we've got Commander Dante again, though only the one Sanguinary Priest this time. This one's taking the jump pack, and he takes maybe the more typical combo of Selfless Healer and the Chief Apothecary. It does mean it's a bit more expensive, but you won't have to pay the command points for bringing back dead models. He's also a fair bit more ferocious in combat as well, as he's packing the Teeth of Terror, so he's still going to be utterly ferocious in his own right, usually having 7 or 8 attacks with fairly decent AP, still going to be murderous to elite infantry. Then for the different choices, we've got a really stacked Primaris Chaplain on bike. He's really gone all in on fun stuff here. He has the Mantra of Strength and the Canticle of Hate for +2 to charge. Casts 2 litanies with the Master of Sanctity, though only on a 3+. Has the Gift of Foresight trait to allow you to reroll 1 hit, wound, and save, really quite good for both damage and defense. And then uses the Artisan of War trait to allow him to take 2 different relics, an Adamantine Mantle for a 5+ Feel No Pain, and also the Armor Indomitus. Between those, it gives you just a ridiculously tanky biker chaplain. He can have a 3+ invul for a turn and then also re-roll it, and between that and transhuman physiology if he needs it, you're very unlikely to be able to shift him from a key point unless you're just expending ridiculous volumes of fire. A very sturdy anchor for giving out buffs to the nearby assault troops, and potentially could be quite useful for actually meeting them on the board as well, maybe if they dropped in and gave them +2 to charge. Finally, we've got a Sanguinary Ancient with the Oncarmin Sword. He takes Rites of War for his Aura of Obsec, and he also takes the tried and tested Wrath of Baal relic. Perhaps the main reason that you'd really want to take a Sanguinary Ancient along, as it gives jump pack units an extra threat range, giving them +2 to their move. Just gives them an extra bit of threat, meaning that they can strike from really, really far away, potentially even doing first turn charges if they so wish. Then we've got a very similar set of troops, 2 Assault Intercessors this time and 1 unit of Incursors. Cheap nice chaff to put on objectives and being fairly durable, and they'll still beat down light infantry that get too close. And then we've just got a seriously hefty amount of jump packs, a huge unit of Death Company with 4 Thunderhammers and 4 Inferno pistols. I'm going to guess that they'll often be throwing themselves toward the enemy with Forlorn Fury. With both Thunderhammers and the pistols, they should be able to pose decent threats to the enemy both in the shooting and assault phase, which is kind of interesting for Death Company. And then this list is going very, very heavy on the Sanguinary Guard. 2 units of 5, 1 with axes, 1 with swords, and 1 with 1 Inferno pistol, 1 with 2. Then 1 enormous unit of 10 of them, mainly with axes, though 3 with power fists. I guess they won't like things with -1 damage very much, but if they're charging when they're nearby a warlord for the full rerolls, there's going to be very few things in the game that can withstand that sort of brutal charge. Finally, we've got a unit of 5 Vanguard veterans. They all take the jump packs and storm shields, and 3 take lightning claws, 2 take thunderhammers. A nice and slightly tougher general purpose unit, one that's going to be fairly slanted towards taking out heavy infantry like Custodes. Overall, looks like a really good fun and brutal Blood Angels list. Kind of fun to be going almost all in on the jump pack threats. There's not a lot more satisfying for Blood Angels than just jumping in and wiping out the enemy in righteous brutal melee. Again though, certainly a list that would have to be played with very carefully. All the units are really quite expensive, you don't want to be sacrificing them in any sort of bad trades. A slightly tricky question of using speed to bound from cover to cover, hopefully destroying important enemy stuff, while not getting overexposed to return fire or combat. Again, a real achievement to be placing quite so highly with Blood Angels, particularly given how tough the competitive meta is at the moment. It's always fun to see some strong performances with armies that aren't exactly top tier right now. Let me know what you think of the army list down in the comments below, or if you have any other insights as to how they're played. I'm sure I've missed a fair few subtleties. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.